Waves of Harmony. And today I have with me Mick George, and he is the co-owner and founder of Keystone Australia and Moral Injury AU. Welcome, Mick.
Andrea, thank you for having me here. It's always a delight to be on one of your podcasts. I understand that you've hit the top 10 in Australia.
I don't know where you're getting your data from, but that's very encouraging. Thank you.
Maybe that indicates the quality of the discussion that's going to happen from his point onwards, but hopefully it will improve from here.
Definitely, if you're in that. So these are conversations from the yellow chair, although you're not sitting next to me like a lot of my guests, because you're kind of chiming in from Canberra at the moment.
Yep, yeah, I am from an office in Canberra. Yep.
So Mick, just give us, we've already had one vlog together, but just briefly tell us, you've got your backgrounds there. Can you tell us what your current work is?
Yeah, sure. So my background through my working life, the vast majority was full-time military as an infantry officer and then as a chaplain. So about 20 years and 10 years respectively. And then worked for a large mental health company for a while. And then my wife and I have started off these two companies a while back. Keystone Australia, that does a lot of work in the, what do we do? Coaching, mentoring. We work in the psychosocial space, a lot of de-escalation and effective communication training, as well as other facilitation, such as in leadership and teamwork ethics, that sort of stuff. And then Moral Injury AU, funnily enough, really focuses in on moral injury, which has been now added into the DSM, the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, as under Z codes, and was hugely featured in the Royal Commission in Defence and Veteran Suicide, where they wrote an entire chapter on moral injury. And the summary of that particular chapter, or the forward to that chapter, literally says all the problems we've found in all these different areas associated with defence, all these problems lead to moral injury. And that then is the major factor that leads to defence and veteran suicide. And so to the best of my knowledge, we're still the only company in Australia that actually runs and gives people the qualification to support those with moral injury. And so we run around the place doing that every so often, which is great.
Yeah. So you're in the top 10 and there's not even 9 more.
Yeah. So a monopoly would be good. That's although the government doesn't approve of monopolies, but so far no one else has come up with the intellectual course, the rigor behind a course. So yeah, look, that's a lot of fun. So I've done some training with, for example, police chaplains in New South Wales, Victoria, and Queensland, and also the AFP, and that's been really helpful. And we've done some work with the RSL, and we continue to work in that sort of space.
Yeah, wow, it's a real privilege to have you speaking with me today, and for all of our listeners, Mick I mean, there's his credentials right there, and he's only giving you just a snippet of his full resume, which is quite impressive, as I know him personally and professionally. Today, we're going to discuss a little bit more in depth about, we started speaking about religiosity and spirituality, and which led us to worldview, and why worldview is such an important aspect of therapy, and how clinicians who are not necessarily chaplains or rabbis or pastors or priests can actually get into that space in spirituality and actually use or maybe understand the questioning that might lead to a person's foundational sort of problems a little bit better, rather than just sort of skimming the surface and addressing symptoms that we find in therapy. So Mick, I'm going to open up with a couple of sort of questions that might lead us through this space today, or in this talk, which is, why is it important to identify a person's worldview? And maybe as also we'll discuss later in this podcast is also why is it important that we know our own worldview as clinicians? Yeah. And how can these things inform the methods we use or the discussions that we initiate with the people that we're working with? So how might this inform the methods that we use or the discussions that we initiate with the people that we're working with?
Yeah, great. I've got a slide I'm going to put up in 2 ticks, but just before I go there, it might be helpful just to take a little bit of a back step. And this is far too broad and binary, but if we could perhaps just think about, if we classify our clients and people that we're trying to help into 2 very broad binary categories. One is people who've got some sort of medical condition, whether that be, I don't know, autism, DID, something along those lines, that there's a chemical imbalance and they need specific medical intervention.
Yeah.
And there's certainly overlap with the second category, which is people who don't have necessarily an underlying medical condition, but they've had an experience that has affected them in a way so that there's a negative result from that experience, and it's been impairing their mental health, and they haven't been able to process it and work through it by themselves.
So basically what you're doing is contextualizing this for us, that we have people who maybe perhaps are suffering from things that are very, like, they're not able to, they don't have insight. And then we have people who do have some insight that can actually go through those discussions with us. Is that what you're saying? Those are the people who we're talking about a little. There's going to be some overlap. For the most part, we're speaking with people who have some insight.
Yeah, and even if you do have an underlying medical condition, you probably very likely have some insight that you can provide some assistance, but they may also need to be a further medical intervention. So when we start talking, I'm going to share my, okay, has that come up?
Yep.
Great. I think that there are a couple of different versions of it. This is just one that I found, which I thought was reasonably helpful.
Yep.
The reason why I think somebody's worldview is so important is that my experience, regardless of whether you're a mental health clinician, so a counselor, a psychologist, a social worker, or a chaplain, there is a danger that we focus on those outer rings, sort of the choices, the behavior, and the consequences, because they're very easy to see. You can see the consequences.
Yeah.
That if you choose to do online gambling and your behavior is that you start to become addicted to it, and the consequences are that you lose all your money and there's not enough food on the table. Wow, that stands out at you, and certainly that needs to be stabilized.
Yeah.
But how do we actually get to the foundational problem so that it doesn't repeat itself?
Right.
When you look at organizations such as AA, for example, which started off from the church, they started that off. They're looking to go all the way back to what is your actual belief structure? What is your worldview? Because if you want to affect somebody's behavior and change that behavior permanently, then there needs to be a worldview that supports that. Otherwise, all we're doing is we're putting a Band-Aid on a deeper problem, which is a lot harder to see as an internal. And we spoke about in the last video we did, and just in case people didn't see that my opening question often when I'm supporting somebody, particularly if I don't know them, is to go all the way back, and my opening question after we've done some pleasantries and we've made life comfortable is, hey, you were born, what happened next? And then I want to really unpack different parts of their life and go into a bit of depth. But the foundational thing that I'm interested in is, what is their worldview? What is their basis of right and wrong?
Yeah. So just to kind of capture that, where we're at right now is that pretty much all of us as counselors or chaplains or psychologists are beginning somewhere. And we often begin with that narrative approach. We begin with the story. Where does the story begin? And sometimes we actually have to lead the person back to the beginning rather than kind of being in the event that's brought them into the office. We're actually saying, let's go back and bring it back, and let's listen to what's coming out there. And I just actually, a thought came into my mind. I actually want to get your thoughts on this. Is when you talk about the choices, behavior, consequences, those outer rings that you're describing, we can make change, because cognitive behavior therapy is looking at changing patterns, isn't it? And making different choices, exhibiting different behavior, and then experiencing a different consequence that encourage us to go back and make different choices and get different behaviors, and etc. But that takes a long time often. And sometimes, like you're saying, it doesn't actually stick because we're not actually going deeper into that worldview. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think that there's a danger when you look at the success rate, or indeed the failure rate of a modality such as CBT. There's a reasonably high failure rate. Either you take it a dropout rate, or statistically, people's responses actually they get worse rather than better as a means of CBT. That I always think we've got to be very careful now. Mental health's not like a drug where you sort of go, well, unless it's got a 95% success rate, we're not going to use it. It's obviously a lot more complex than that. And so there's an understanding of why modalities such as CBT are accepted, even though there's a dropout rate, a failure rate, if you want to use those terms.
Yeah, right.
But I'm always interested in trying to find out what is the foundational problem.
Yeah.
Because, and this is my point in this sort of section, is that let's say somebody's got an addiction problem and it's a gambling addiction. Okay, CBT, I might be able to address the gambling addiction, but what happens if all I'm doing is really transferring that to another destructive behavior? And so, okay, I've resolved the gambling addiction, no dramas. But if I haven't gone back to the foundational problem and addressed the foundational problem of why the individual was choosing to do such negative destructive behavior, then it's just going to transfer in a period of time to something else.
To something else. So you're saying going all the way back to the center where that worldview lies is the way to do this.
Well, that's what I've found to be particularly helpful in when I'm providing support to people. But that doesn't mean that we're not also trying to address the symptoms. So if I'm working with a mental health clinician as a chaplain who's addressing and maybe addressing using CBT or something, then that can be really, really helpful. And obviously you need the client's permission to work in conjunction. But when my time in the military, for example, I'd work very, very closely with multiple mental health clinicians with individuals. And that is by far where I've got the best results when working as part of a medical team. Then you can see people's lives completely changed.
Very interesting. It's a really profound statement, actually. I wish we had more data around that and more research that actually exemplifies that, because often we get, I know in the area that I work in, we often talk about, oh, this is just a duplication of service. Why are we providing two clinicians when we're, doing the same thing? Well, the sum of the combination, the sum is greater than the parts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree with that more. Yep.
Yeah. So talk about a little bit, Mick, going into that worldview. How would you go about doing that? What kind of questions do you ask in getting there? And how does that actually play out? Maybe you have some examples of how that does play out with somebody with a addiction or some sort of trauma background.
Yeah, sure. So if by and large, if somebody's had a negative experience and it's had a detrimental impact upon their life and they haven't been able to process it and work through it. This is again a little bit binary, but perhaps this might be helpful in sort of the short time that we have here. That an individual see themselves either as a victim or a perpetrator. Sometimes in the same instance, they can see themselves as both. Yeah. In this part of the incident that occurred, I was the perpetrator, in this part I was the victim, or reverse. But maybe this might be helpful. So between victim perpetrators, like I prepared it before, if I have been hurt by somebody, and I may have been hurt by myself, that's fine. I've done something, and I'm the perpetrator of myself. There's a bridge there that needs to be. Well, there's a chasm, and we need to have this with somehow span this with a bridge. And let's just look from the perspective of the victim. If I see that I'm a victim, then again, a little bit simplistic, but perhaps there's 4 responses. I've been grieved by something that's happened in the past, and I haven't been able to process it. Here are and I literally tell people this, you've only got 4 choices. The bazooka is you can choose revenge. Somebody, some organization has hurt you. My choice may be I want to get revenge on them. Yeah. Okay, doesn't work. Maybe my choice is I'm not even going to think about it. That's the blindfold. I'm going to pretend it didn't happen and just get on with my life. Well, that issue just sits at the subconscious and eats away, and eventually it comes out. Maybe it's baggage. And in fact, that issue has impacted me so much that I see myself now as a bit of a professional victim, that I now see the whole world is against me because of this negative impact, and I take more and more baggage on. Or the 4th option is, am I going to try and build a bridge? And that can be really helpful. There are things that enable this bridge to be built between the victim and the perpetrator, and it goes up from both sides. And I haven't really unpacked the perpetrator too much, but I think people understand where we're coming from. There are enablers to build a bridge. Faith is a good one, because and it doesn't really matter which faith, because if somebody has a faith, then there is an objective truth to morality. There's a set of structures around that, and there's a basis of forgiveness in each of those structures. You can see the second thing down there being an objective truth or basis of morality, such as stoicism, is really helpful, because then we can start to identify whether you're the victim or the perpetrator, what actually went wrong here. Why do you feel aggrieved? But maybe they don't even have that. Then you can look at things like the secret, or a self-help type thing, which is there is a wealth of evidence that going through this type of process will help you as an individual.
Okay.
But then there of course, there are things that inhibit this bridge being built. So funnily enough, a subjective basis to morality. I've found trying to counsel a nihilist who says that there is no such thing as these concepts of right and wrong, good and evil don't actually exist. That becomes very difficult to then explain why they're feeling bad. And so you've got to really unpack that. That can be difficult.
Yeah.
In the same way that you may have somebody who's an atheist and anti-faith and says, well, I don't want to forgive somebody, I just want to get revenge on them. That's a bit of a inhibitor. They may not have a relationship with whoever they perceive to be the perpetrator or the victim. So somebody could have passed away. It could be by choice. They could be faceless. They could be a huge organization, the government. And the individual's current self-identity really hurts that bridge being built if they don't see themselves or have the self-confidence to go through the process. Look, that is very, very quick, but I think it's just, and in our, when I train on this, we then spend 2 days unpacking a whole process about how to build this bridge and what you can actually do.
So that can I just clarify? Is that diagram kind of the basis for moral injury, because that's the injury that's been?
For moral injury, and that's what I see is that one of those foundational problems that people often have, and it can certainly coexist with things, for example, as trauma. If somebody's gone through trauma or depression, that it is often as a cause that there's been this breach in somebody's perception of right and wrong. And if we can work through this and understand why somebody feels like they're being grieved, and work through a forgiveness process of either themselves or somebody else, then that is particularly helpful of addressing the foundational problem.
Yeah. So it's good to hear about. So sort of to summarize some of these points is that, talking about this foundational problem and getting there through the worldview to understand how they've viewed these events, whether they're a single event or repeated events that are similar over and over, and getting to that space where we can really unpack that is helpful in moving forward and actually getting that change that's needed to get through that. Again, this popped into my head just quickly, is that I'm sure you've experienced it. How does it sort of happen when you get the answer? Can you see it like a light switch going on with somebody where they go, oh, now I get this. Thanks. I'm done now. Or how do you see it sort of playing out? What are your can you share a couple of, your success stories of how it kind of comes through? You must have them.
There's just yes. In the great instances, that's exactly how it happens. It's a light switch, and somebody goes, got it, and I never see them again. And you go, that's terrific. So, for example, there's this gentleman who caught up with me a couple of months ago. This is a great story, and large family, really complex story. And it took about an hour to unpack it all. And matriarch mother had passed away, and there was inheritance problems. And as soon as you hear inheritance problems and a disgruntled family members and all this sort of stuff, you've got to unpack all of that and work out what's going on.
Yeah.
And then with that particular individual, he was really aggrieved that the younger sister, who was the black sheep of the family, had got the holiday house and all this money, and he hadn't. And you go, hey, I get it. I'd feel like that too, hearing the story from his perspective. I'm sure the sister had a different perspective. And then we were able to work through and get to a point of, hey, well, what would be the benefits if you did forgive her? And you just were able to move through this. And he just started listing all these things off. And he went, well, I wouldn't be spending 80% of my life really angry, and I wouldn't be staying awake all night, and I'd be able to go to the family weddings and not feel negatively towards her. And we were able to do some perspective taking of what would her perspective be? And then it unpacked that, she had a different perspective. And there was actually a different side of this story of where he got some money in the past and all the rest of it. Oh, that's really interesting. And then also perspective. What's her life been like? Oh, it's been terrible. Number of failed relationships and daughters on drugs and whatever else it was. And by the end of it, he was like, okay, I can actually give her a call tonight and just say, you know what? I just want to say sorry for the pain I've caused, and I just want you to know that I've released anything against you. Now, here's the important thing when somebody goes through that process. There's an intellectual decision, and then there's an emotional journey.
Yeah.
So, for example, when somebody gets married, if you had a couple who got married in 1960 and there's a photo of them that just in the moment after the priest has pronounced them husband and wife, you would say that they're 100% married, aren't they?
Yeah.
They've signed the documents, they've been pronounced, they're 100% married, aren't they?
But the marriage is really just starting.
But they're 100% married.
Yeah.
Yep. 60 years later, they're more married than what they were at the beginning. And that was the point you're making before. The marriage has just started. And if they're going to write a book, if they wrote a book on that first day of marriage, you go, yeah, they're not married. They're not subject matter experts. They don't know anything about marriage, but they are 100% married. Like they could have the title, John and Jill, 100% married. And you go, well, yeah, but it's just a very short book. We got pronounced and we went to the reception and it was great. We have not fought at all. And
that's the best part.
Yeah. But she's a short book. 60 years later, we've got volumes. And if you wanted to get some marriage counseling off somebody, you go to John and Jill after the 60 years, not on day one.
Yeah.
It's the same with forgiveness. And the interesting thing with a vow is that there's some parallels there that we make vows when we get married. In the same way, if we make an intellectual decision, we want to forgive somebody, there's a journey of forgiveness where it's an emotion. We're not robots. And so there can be times we can get re-hurt and we have to go back and we need to remind ourselves, oh, no. I made a decision just like I made a vow during the hard times in my marriage. Oh, no, I made a vow to this person. For me, Tammy, my wife, I made a vow that I'm going to stay with her through sickness, health, you name it, good times, bad times. So when those bad times do occur, you've got to go back to the vow. You go, actually, I'm sticking with you.
Yeah.
In the same way with forgiveness, somebody can be nasty to you and you sort of go, hang on, I'm now, no, I've decided to forgive them for this thing. Now, if there's more stuff, no worries, we need to work through that. And I think that's a really helpful way when I'm counseling somebody to give them up front and give them permission. This is going to be an emotional journey, not just an intellectual one.
Yeah, a feeling versus a cognitive.
Yeah. And the two combine, which is fine.
Yeah.
But giving someone permission that it's okay in the future if you sort of feel angry towards that person again.
Yeah.
Don't forget, rid yourself of that and remember all the benefits you get from actually going through and forgiving the person. That's a bit of acceptance commitment therapy going right there.
Yeah. So I know that we're not going to take a deeper dive into this right now, but I'm just going back to when you're talking through the guy, for example, with the inheritance issue and talking about husbands and wives and thinking of that picture of the victim and the perpetrator and that bridge that comes over. And the bridge that you're talking about right now in these examples is sort of veering in the forgiveness therapy space, in the space of forgiveness therapy. Do you want to just give us a little bit of a teaser of what that entails? How did it come up? What is it?
Yeah, so Dr. Enright came up with forgiveness therapy in the 80s. And what he did is he put a name of something that, as a pastor, that I'd say that the church has been an expert at for thousands of years, but a clinical way of looking at it and a more a broader approach, I think, is extremely helpful. And I talk about forgiveness therapy with lots and lots of people, regardless of their worldview, because it is so absolutely helpful and I would argue foundational in somebody's mental health and being able to process through difficult issues. Forgiveness of self, forgiveness of others is really, really critical. And so Dr. Enright just helpfully put some frameworks around that so that there'll be a clinical model in the same way that we say narrative therapy or CBT. And so somebody who maybe hasn't had training as a pastor can certainly look at that and go, that is not a difficult process to follow.
Yeah.
But the benefits are massive. And I think sometimes forgiveness therapy gets a little bit of a bad name because they go, well, forgiveness, that's a religious word. We don't do that. When there is overwhelming evidence in the same way that would say there's evidence in CBT and narrative therapy and these other modalities that it is certainly worthwhile for clinicians to have a look. And it's not complex. I was on there today looking at Google images, and you can certainly get a nice little handout from Dr. Andrea right there on net after about 2 minutes searching about, even if you knew nothing about it, 4-step process. Very easy.
Yeah. And we'll put that in the links on this talk, but I'm just being prodded by my team's alert that's saying we only have 5 minutes left in this talk.
Sure.
Which I think it would be good if we just stick to that. And I just want to have you talk a little bit about, in this last 5 minutes, the flip side to knowing the worldview of the patient or the person who's coming to you. I know that you have a very strong opinion about worldviews and moral perspectives when it comes to the clinicians themselves. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, just very quick.
And I think actually we spoke about it earlier, and I wanted to hear your story about your employment process, about how this came out.
Yeah. So I used to, when I was working for a big multinational mental health company, I used to often do interviews to mental health clinicians. And one of the questions, HR hated me doing this, but I thought it was so important. I'd actually ask mental health clinicians, hey, what's your basis of right or wrong? What for you is your foundation of moral values? And I'm talking 90% of the times, clinicians would just look at me and go, what are you talking about? That there is no, in fact, I had somebody who lectured, this lady was a psychologist, and she also lectured in ethics at a university. And I asked her the question, well, what's your basis of right or wrong? Ethics and morality, what for you forms the foundations of right or wrong? And it took 5 minutes to unpack, and then that the individual ended up saying, well, it's all completely subjective. Now, there's no dramas with that for an individual. I'm not here to critique it. But from a clinical point of view, we need to be very, very aware of both our conscious and our unconscious biases.
Yeah.
Because if, for example, if I was an atheist and I actually counseled a police sergeant, he was in one of those high-performing tactical teams, and he was suffering from PTSD, but he was also suffering from moral injury. And he had to leave the police in the end of the day because he'd been exposed to a whole heap of horrific incidences. And he was getting some mental health support off a high-range psychologist. And he kept on talking about the fact that he was a Christian, and that some of the stuff that he was having difficulties were that he had breached his own moral values. And in the end, that the psychologist said, if you keep on talking about your faith, I'm going to have to tell you that I'm going to have to get you to find another clinician. And so he just stopped talking about that aspect of, and eventually he just said it was really that the support was detrimental. It was doing the reverse of what it was meant to be doing. And so I think that it is incredibly important. Now, I've got biases, both conscious and unconscious biases, and I've got to be very careful that when I'm counseling somebody who doesn't have a Christian worldview, that I'm not there. So, for example, in the military as a chaplain, I was doing relationship counseling with a same-sex couple. I had signed on. I had said that I'm willing to do that type of support. I had to be very careful there that I'm not going to be putting my worldview and my biases towards a same-sex couple, because I just want to love them and make sure that they're going to thrive in their life. And that's what I'll put up my hand to do. So I'd say for all clinicians, if they haven't worked out, if you're watching this and going, oh, I don't know what my worldview is, I don't know what my basis of right. I'm glad I wasn't interviewed by him. Then I think it's a really worthwhile thing to do. And Andrea, we can talk about this later on. It's okay.
We will. But I'm, again, aware of the time, and I think we're probably going to get pushed out of this meeting. So I want to thank you a great deal for today and all that you've shared and given us. And there are more talks coming forward, more in depth about moral injury and forgiveness therapy. But for now, thank you so much, Mick, for joining me. And I'm looking forward to more discussions with you and you being a regular guest on my channel, because it's
sure.
great.
Anytime. No worries. Thank you very much, Andrew. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And you can always support us by listening and sharing. Thank you.